and welcome to another clip from exercises in watercolour. This one is called the old woodshed, and you can see the photograph from what we're dealing. Just to start, before we start here, a small exercise in utilising some of the colours that I bring into these paintings and the effect of blending them together on the paper, and the nice subtleties that you can gain by bringing these rich colours in their own right into a third colour, as we're doing here. These are not all of the colours on the palette. Sometimes I would use others to do the same sort of blend, but I recommend that you do this sort of exercise occasionally just to find out a little more about what your colours will do. I use the two at the top, burnt sienna and ultramarine blue, to create a grey, which is a staple colour on my palette. The second one is raw sienna and alizarin crimson, alizarin being a very rich, deep red and so on, and I can modify that slightly by adding some raw sienna to it and still get a lovely rich tan colour, which can come in handy. Burnt sienna can occasionally be a little bit too strong, so we can moderate this with a little raw sienna added into the mix. The third one down is raw sienna again and Prussian blue. Many people will have yellow ochre on their palette rather than raw sienna. I prefer the sienna for the reasons of warmth and richness and so on. I find I get better results that way. But again, this is what I do. This doesn't necessarily mean to say that this is the only means of success. It's not. These two, raw sienna and Prussian blue, will give me quite a deep green, good for various treatments of foliage here, there and everywhere. And you can see that as the two paints blend within the moisture on the paper, you get these wonderful effects. Rather than try and get that effect on the palette by mixing them till they're just about done, you can get the same effect or better just by allowing the colours to do what they do on the paper. You can see that I'm using a reasonable amount of moisture. These are going on to dry paper, and they're still quite strong. They're not. I don't like a lot of weak washes, too transparent. I like to see the colours I'm using. What I'm suggesting is that all of these colours now, all I've done now is to bring a little of the opposing colour into the lighter one here, a bit of alizarin into raw sienna, a bit of Prussian blue into the raw sienna there, and some into the Indian yellow, just to see what effects it gives you with a direct contrast of one colour to another. This is our pencil sketch from the photograph that we had before. We'll start with just a light sky treatment. This is a little bit of manganese blue. I find it's quite light and very bright, which I like to use. I like that little bit of warmth in the sky when I'm going to use it. This is not a sky scene by any manner of means, but it'll make a good start for us for what we're talking about. Lower area and so on here, I want it to be fairly warm, fairly well lit. So I'll bring in a raw sienna into here and use that as the lit part of the pasture, the grass around this shed, which was pretty scruffy, growing all over the place. So we don't have to have anything too specific. We can get the impression of light and so on just by virtue of the change in colours around the base of the shed. This shed was on the same property as the other old shed that we have in this series of video clips. And a remarkable amount of character that, shown by these things, which are just thrown together with corrugated iron and some iron bark or eucalypt or whatever, and fitted together just to provide a bit of shelter for the wood that would suffice the farmhouse requirements. The background green I've used here is a little bit of ultramarine and raw sienna, which gives me a greyish green for a start off, not too strong. You can see the same colour behaves differently when it goes over the top of the raw sienna at the bottom of the page. Same colour, it's just treated differently with the colour that it's combining with on the paper. Just a little bit of cobalt into this raw sienna here, and that gives me another slight green alternative, which I bring into the lighter areas around the base of the shed. Again, there's nothing specific. We're only suggesting just lights and darks and various contrasts. The brush I'm using at this stage is a number 4 mop, squirrel hair, and when used with either the point or the side of the brush, it's quite effective. That cobalt and raw sienna give me a very useful greyish sort of a green, which I can use as undercolour. Working on the shadows, the shaded areas inside the shed at this point, I'm using ultramarine as a base for this. There'll be a couple of treatments that will go with this and so on, which will be evident shortly. Again, I like the idea of these colours that I'm going to blend to get them to do it on the paper rather than do it on the palette. These are quite rich and quite moist. Working wet over wet is a big help. You don't have to overbrush anything to push it together. Just extending that section there under the shed by adding a little bit of clean water and drag that wash out a little bit towards the edge of the shed. This is a weaker version of the same grey. A bit of bleed there from our internal mix there, and that's fine. It's a nice soft section of the wall part. So I can make use of that. Whether we keep it or not is another matter. And now just the same grey, the same lighter grey, just pointing out a few of the posts and pylons and so on like that around the shed. Here and there, a little bit of shaded area and so on at the top. Brush I've switched to now is a favourite number 20, a Skoda synthetic, which does all kinds of things for me. Fine work as well as broad applications for the foliage and trees and so on that we're working on now. This is ultramarine blue and raw sienna. Stronger mix. You can see that there's not a lot of water on the palette, and they're certainly not running. So I'm using fairly strong application of paint. Not quite the same consistency as we would use at the completion of the painting, but I think it needs to be quite strong. Here we've got a bit of burnt sienna, a little bit of Prussian blue, which gives us even stronger again. We're not specifying any parts of the tree at all, only the lights and darks, contrast of the dark, cooler mass and so on against the lighter area of the roof, and bounded by the warmer ground colours and so on towards the lower part of the painting. Here we're going back to a staple mix, which is burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, just the side of the brush to take a little bit of that out, just to give me enough scope to put a bit of burnt sienna back into it, just to give it maybe a little bit of a warmer grey appearance rather than make it too dark. In this shaded area here of the door, we're shortly going to put just a touch of red into there, which I find is a wonderful way of really luxuriating those shaded areas, make them nice and strong. Just with a damp brush here, I'm just taking a little bit out of the sides of those corrugated iron sheets on the side of the shed, just to give them a bit of form. I'm using these super foam eraser articles that you can buy in most of the supermarkets and so on. I've seen them used in the past, and I just noticed recently an article by John Salmon, a most prominent American artist and so on, who works highly complex pieces and so on, and he swears by these things, so I thought, well, we'll give it a try. Rob Candy is another man who likes to use them, and they're well worth using to just take a little bit of colour out and so on, where maybe the clean water itself is not quite enough. Shortly, we'll take out the small piece that's in the door, the shaded door here and so on. You can see there's a suggestion of something inside that door, so we're just going to work on that a little bit with that eraser. And just reinforcing my darks at the rear of the shed to make sure that I've got that very strong contrast with the roof. I don't want to lose that at all. That's helping force the main subject towards the viewer. Little pile of cut wood in the front of the shed, which is again purely suggestion, nothing more. Bit of ordinary masking tape, just either side of the area that we're trying to work at here, just so we don't spread too far, and wet it down well and give it a good rub off with the eraser. Then take your masking tape off very carefully, and that will get you heading back towards the whiteness of the paper. It won't get you all the way back if in fact you've been using very strong blues or violets or red staining colours and so on, you'll never get back to the whiteness of the paper. But it's a good way of reducing that area in the darker parts of the painting, rather than rely on using body colour or gouache or whatever later on to indicate that. Watercolour painting is as much about taking parts out of the painting that are not contributing or that you need for effect, as much as putting things in. I've done the major part of the painting at this point. It's now just a matter of a few bits and pieces just to tidy up and so on. And for this, I think I've switched to the smaller Escoda synthetic brush at this point, which is equally good. I'm not wanting to have it hold too much paint and so on, but it's got a wonderful point to it, and I can draw bits and pieces and so on quite confidently. Getting towards the end of the painting, and I'll use a little bit of gouache here and there just for highlights and so on. I try not to use too much of it. Just occasionally where you lose the light that you might want for effect and so on, and it will help for a highlight or two here and there. I do sometimes use coloured gouache, particularly a flesh colour, just for the warmth and so on. Just for I don't want the white to be too strong if that's what we're using all of the time. And I find that a flesh tint gouache is wonderful for highlights here and there. A few branches here and there just to break the foliage up a bit, so it's not all blobs of green mass here and there. This is being done with a very, very small rigger. I think this is the smallest brush I've ever seen. And the idea is not to overdo it. This is our end result. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed as much as I have bringing it to you.